Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. And I've been very excited to meet Kelvin Pierce, my guest for this episode, for a really long time. My dear friend and colleague John Atack said, Steve, you have to interview Kelvin. And Kelvin, I understand you've done 3 episodes on John Atack's YouTube. That's a plug for his work. So I'm just going to start by reading a little something about you, Kelvin. First of all, you're a fellow author, and your book is entitled Sins of My Father, Growing Up with America's Most Dangerous White Supremacist. So, dun, 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 dun. Like so many of my other guests, you were raised in an authoritarian household. Just turns out that your father was this incredibly important figure in the neo-Nazi white supremacy cult that spawned other cults. But after you exited at age 18, after incredible amounts of emotional abuse, physical abuse, and we'll get into that, we're now talking many years later, and you founded a 501c3 charitable foundation called the Divine Child Foundation that administers to orphan children in the country of Georgia. Kudos to you. So I'll just finish with the intro that Kelvin was raised to be a hardcore racist. His father was Dr. William Pierce, a world-renowned founder and leader of the National Alliance, one of the most well-known hate groups in the world. Kelvin's father was labeled as the most dangerous and influential neo-Nazi or white nationalist in North America by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League for over 30 years. And I already mentioned you suffered years of physical and emotional abuse from your father while you were growing up and left home. And you were, shared your story of rampant abuse, mental illness, and eventual recovery through the power of spiritual self-reflection and choice. And with that, I want to welcome you to the Influence Continuum and my work of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center, where we want people to think for themselves and have a conscience and use common sense and care about others and not be in this kind of binary of black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, we're superior, other people are inferior. That whole mentality is so toxic. So, Kelvin, give us an intro to your book, because I want my listeners to get your book and read it.
Well, I started the book as to kind of be just jotting down parts of my life, just to be, because it wasn't until I was well into my 30s that I actually started telling people who my father was. Because when I was younger, didn't want to be associated with him. I was terrified of being associated with him and what he stood for. And because I was trying to make a life of my own away from him, I didn't want anybody to know. But once the Turner Diaries came out and started getting, the infamy that it deserved, I slowly started telling the few friends that I had, who my dad was and what it was like being raised by him. And universally, I was met with, the reaction of astonishment and you should write a book. And so many people said, you should write a book. You should. And so, I'm not a writer. I'm not skilled at that. But I thought that it might be important for my children and for other people that if I just jotted down my memoirs.
Yep.
But then the 2016 election cycle came upon us. And there was all sorts of sound bites that I was hearing that was taking me back to my childhood. And it made me uncomfortable and it made me sad. I knew that racism was, latent in our country and had been there for decades and decades, centuries. But I felt like we were healing or that we were making progress. And then when I saw us take a deep dive into the opposite direction, I, decided that maybe I should make the book more about just my memoirs and maybe talk more about, hate and how it affected me and then how I was able to eventually reprogram myself away from that.
Great. And you mentioned something I forgot to say in the intro is that your father penned the Turner Diaries under a pen name. Was it McDonald or something
Andrew
like?
McDonald, yes,
But this is the text that so many neo-Nazi white supremacists use for doing, asymmetrical warfare to destroy the government and to promote white people over everybody else, get rid of the Jews, virulent anti-Semite. I am a Jew, self-identify, even though my last name sounds like I'm a Muslim, which your dad's people hated too, I should add.
yes.
But
Yeah, I mean, his book was labeled basically the Bible of the racist right, and it's had a profound influence on our country and outside our country too. It's been a big seller in Europe, in the UK. So
I want to make
Timothy
your book a
McVeigh.
bigger seller, Kelvin. People need to hear what it was like growing up with him. He was a bit of a monster.
A bit, yes, indeed. It was not. By the time I left home, I was severely damaged. There's no doubt about that.
So give my listeners a few stories of corporal punishment, or like, what was it like growing up in the household?
Well, when I was young, my almost all my thoughts were about my dad. I was fascinated by him. I dearly wanted him to acknowledge me and to tell me that I was okay and to be proud of me. But he never did any of that. We never had anything close to a normal father-son relationship. And I wanted that desperately. And because I didn't get that, and because of the way he treated me, which was, a lot of corporal punishment, a lot of negative psychological reinforcement that I was no good, that I was worthless, and that there was something wrong with me. And so, by the time you get to adulthood and you've been programmed like that for 18 years, my thoughts were awful. They were full of hate. They were full of anger. They were full of utter self worth at zero. And I also believed that the things that my dad taught me, I believed that Jews and non-whites were responsible for the many ills of our society. And so even though he did abuse me terribly, I did believe what he taught me by the time I left home. And so I didn't broadcast my racist beliefs when I was younger, but I definitely held firmly onto them. And it shaped the way I viewed other people and interacted with them.
So tell our listeners a little bit more about what led you to get away at 18 and more of your recovery process.
Well, okay. So first of all, when I left home at age 18, I wasn't aware that I had been abused. And I was not aware of all of the anger and the rage that was roiling inside of me. I really thought that what had happened to me was normal. And I thought that the way I felt was normal. So I left home at 18, not like trying to get away from something. I was going towards something else. I wanted to go to the university. I wanted to get an education. I wanted to be an aerospace engineer. Well, when I went to Virginia Tech and I started meeting people from all over the world, including my first roommate was a man of color, I started being challenged on a daily basis about my belief system. My first roommate was a gentleman. He was very intelligent. He was a pacifist. He was an environmentalist, and he understood politics. And I didn't understand any of that. And he had empathy for others. And that was a foreign concept for me. So I learned a lot from him. And that's the very first ember of, wait, maybe what my dad taught me is wrong.
So the university, in a sense, created a situation where you were forced to interact with someone that you had never interacted with, a person of color before, it sounded like.
Yeah. I actually lived with him.
Yeah, and so you didn't say, I want a new roommate and like, get me out of here, or did you have any of those feelings?
No, I mean, I pretty much thought the guy was cool from the first time I met him.
That's really very tough. Say more, because you had been so indoctrinated, but the way I respond to hearing you say that, it's like your authentic self said, no, he's a good person.
Yeah, that's a really good way to describe it. But on the other hand, I still held on to my racist beliefs very stubbornly. And, when I was out in the world by myself, I mean, I was a massive introvert. I was not sociable at all. I didn't go to parties. I didn't join frats or go out in the evenings and party with friends because I didn't really have much in the way of friends. I pretty much stayed by myself with my thoughts. And those thoughts were mostly not good. So, this roommate experience I had was just the tip of an iceberg of beginning the process of trying to heal from this. The first real meaningful healing and challenging of my thought process did not come until much, much, much later. And that was a result of, I was in business. I had already adopted my children. Typical cycle would be my wife would say something like, I need you to do something different, or I need you to stop doing that. Or a client of mine would say, I don't like the way you did this. And I would take that as rejection. I would shut down. I would just go back into you're a worthless human being, and that's the way I felt. And actually a peer of mine who owned a business similar to mine, but in a different area, it was like, hey, Kelvin, I see that depression, but I see hope in you too. You need to get help. And I just scoffed at that. And he said, look, if you don't do it for yourself, your children are going to be massively influenced by your sadness as they're growing up. So if you don't do it for yourself, do it for them. And I was like, wow, so I did. I sought help immediately. I went to a psychiatrist. After 2 sessions, he said, you're depressed. Your dad was a sadist. Here's a prescription to antidepressants. I went to the drugstore and picked them up. And as I was standing there and was told that, these 6 pills are going to cost $75. And I was just like, this is not the answer. So I gave the pills back. I said, I'm sorry, but I don't want these. And so I went back to my friend and I told him about that experience. He says, no, that's not what you need. He said, here's the name of somebody that can help you. And it was a woman, a spiritual based type of counselor. And I met with her and she was just like, you have very awful tapes running through your head. What we need to do is erase all of them and then create new tapes that are, positive, loving, self-loving. She goes, you are, I told her that my Divine Child Foundation, she goes, you are the divine child. And we are going to get you to believe that. And it was through working with her that I was able to challenge my belief system and to reprogram the way I thought about myself. And I learned that I had a choice in regards to my thoughts.
Right.
If you have these awful thoughts running through your head, you don't have to touch them. You don't have to attach yourself to them. You can say, no, I don't want to go there. And then you can replace them with better feeling thoughts. And that was absolutely crucial toward my healing, was to recognize unhealthy mind patterns and to let go of them and then replace them with healthy mind patterns.
Yeah, exactly. But you mentioned anger earlier in your journey, and then it went to depression and sadness. But they're two parts of a powerful emotional state. But as you
Yeah,
said, you were not told loving, encouraging messages, at home.
no. I was basically asked the same question over and over and over again. And that question is, Kelvin, what is wrong with you? And so after a certain period of time, you start wondering, yeah, what is wrong with me? Why am I so worthless?
So it makes me angry for you to think about,
Yeah,
that scene where your parent is saying that. It's so toxic.
yes, yes, indeed. And I'm just extremely fortunate that, I happened upon, this healing path, because I could have lived the rest of my life like this,
Mm.
and I could have gone the other way too, because of my belief system and because of that depression and that anger. People are looking for something to identify with. And it would have been very easy for me to identify with a white supremacist group and say, yeah, let's go with it.
Oh, I'm sure that's
Um,
what your father wanted you to do, and the fact that you weren't being zealous to recruit and adore him, then he was like, "What's wrong with you, Kelvin,
yeah,
that you're not
maybe,
doing
yeah. But
like
there,
all
I
the
guess there
other?"
was something in my heart that, it just wasn't part of who I am or what I want to be.
That's my take. I really believe deep in my heart that people are born, with an authentic self that wants love, that wants truth, that wants safety, that wants nurturance. And when one doesn't get that, a healthy sense of self doesn't form, because in the very early first few years, the child wants to feel adored, right? And paid attention to, and their needs,
Absolutely.
and I can also say that there's so many people I've worked with over 47 years who were born in these authoritarian cults or families, didn't get the love, didn't get the security, the consistency, were neglected as well as beaten. But having their own children provides incredible healing opportunity to give to the child and self heal by doing those types of healthy things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my two daughters are absolutely, without a doubt, the two greatest gifts I've ever received in my life.
Yeah.
And the reason why I adopted is because I refused to have my own kids. I did not want to take the chance that A, that if I had my own kids, that I would produce somebody that felt the way I used to feel, or
Hmm.
B, maybe I was going to be a father like my father was. And that's
Hmm.
one of the reasons why when we adopted, I insisted on having girls, because my father had two boys and he abused them both. But he also had a niece or a couple of nieces that were girls, and he was incredible with them. He would get down on the floor with them, he would play with them, he would tickle them, and he never, not one time, ever did that with me or my brother. And so I was like, well, maybe it's boys. I had no idea. I wasn't willing to take the chance,
It
though.
was unconscious, but apparently your wife was willing to not have biological children with you because of
Well,
this.
it just so happened that it was a very fortunate coincidence that one of the first things she told me when we were talking about family planning, she goes, ever since I was a kid, I've always been fascinated with the idea of adoption.
So that was a match on that
Yes, it
level.
was a match for sure.
And I have to imagine, having a woman want to spend her life with you and raise kids with you is also very healing.
Yeah. Well, the challenges that we have faced together certainly has forced me to really take a hard look at some of my beliefs and the way uh, acted in a lot of different situations,
Mm-hmm.
which because of my beliefs, I did not act well in a lot of situations. Whenever I feel like I was being rejected, I would shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And, my wife hated that because she would be like, let's talk about it. What's going on? I want to know what you're thinking. You're a mystery to me. And I would shut down and not talk. And that was extraordinarily frustrating for her.
Mm-hmm. I bet. All I can say is it's a journey, and
It is indeed.
there are good couples therapists who can help people recover from their childhood wounds and can teach skills and offer exercises and other types of skill building and
Yeah, I have
such.
learned a lot. I have learned a lot and changed a lot on the way I do and the way I react and the way I feel about myself.
Yeah. And I've befriended several people who were recruiters into neo-Nazi, white supremacist, anti-Semitic groups, and they all describe how hard it was to live with so much hate, and also very positive experiences, as you were sharing with your first roommate, for example, where people were so nice to them, and they really had a hard time hating them when people were being so genuine and warm and kind. Do you happen to know Arno Michaelis by any chance?
No, I do not.
I know that your father was involved with recruitment music, bands and whatever.
Yeah.
And he
Resistance
had
Records.
he had his own band, White Power Band, recruiting people into the cult of white supremacy. And he talked about how his boss at one of his jobs, who was Jewish, noticed he didn't have any lunch, and he offered him half a sandwich. And it was like, he's being nice to me for no reason, and why should he? Because he saw all the tattoos all over his body with the swastikas, etc. Or the black woman at McDonald's that was warm and smiling and serving, and when, I think it was when he had a daughter, he was like, I don't want to raise my child like this. Like, this is toxic.
Yeah, I mean, my first rule was if I do everything opposite of what my father did, then maybe I will turn out okay as a father. But
I'm sorry for laughing, but
no, seriously,
you got to do what you got to do. It was dysfunctional, so the opposite of dysfunction must be functional.
Right. I had a similar experience with my first boss as an aerospace engineer working for the Navy. His name was Jonah Ottensasser, and he was an Orthodox Jew, and he was my direct supervisor. And I tell you what, over the years that I worked with him, he was kind, he was a mentor, he was nurturing, he was everything that my father said Jews were not. And he, it was a powerful influence on my life that, my dad is completely wrong. This guy doted on his family. His religion was extremely important to him, but he openly accepted others, without judgment. He was always kind to people, nurturing. Yeah, he definitely had a powerful influence on me.
So I didn't realize you were in the military.
Well, I was an aerospace engineer working for the United States Navy. I worked for the Naval Air Systems Command. Yeah.
Got it. So needless to say, your father was very bright and you're very bright, and he was educated and you were educated, but you've made something really positive with your life.
I like to think so.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
So if somebody's listening to this and they've been getting recruited into a white supremacist, anti-Semitic thing, what would you want to say to them?
Well, I guess what I would do is I would ask them a question, and I would ask them, does that hate, does that feeling of superiority over others, does that really feel good? And, how do you really feel about yourself? Because I know for a fact that if you hate others, it's because deep down inside you're hating yourself. And so I would challenge them to take a deep dive on the inside and to ask yourself, why do I really feel this way? Instead of trying to project that hate or that feeling of unworthiness onto others, because certainly it's a temporary fix. You do have a momentary feeling of, I'm better than that person. I identify with other people that feel like we're better than those people, but it's kind of an addiction. And just like drugs and alcohol, it could feel good at first, but ultimately it's chronically damaging to your health. And so, yeah, I would definitely challenge you to really take an honest look inside and ask yourself, why do I hate these people? Why do I feel this way?
That's great. And I don't know how much you know about my approach, but I basically recommend asking respectful questions that make people really think about things and have a new perspective on things and get in touch with feelings that may be suppressed, and to encourage people to reality test. So I'm just imagining a scene where there's a white supremacist. I'm standing there, and Kelvin walks, into that frame, and I get to say, to him, "Have you ever heard of the Turner Diaries?" And he's like, "Yeah." "Do you think it's great?" "Oh, it's fantastic. It's wonderful. Timothy McVeigh, used it when he bombed the, Oklahoma City, federal building, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Do you know who Kelvin is?" "No, who's Kelvin?" "Well, do you know who actually wrote the Turner Diaries? Do you know the name of the man who actually was the author of that novel?" I'm assuming they'll know Pierce. Maybe not, but I would assume they know.
Yeah, most likely.
Right? And then I'm like, "Meet his son." And give you the setup to then ask the question.
Yeah. I was pretty concerned at first about putting myself out there, how I was going to get treated by, my dad's admirers. And, I've definitely gotten some feedback, but for the most part, it's been more or less respectful, even though, they completely disagree and they claim that I'm, oh, he's just writing a book so the Jews will pay him money. He's just doing it for the money, oh, it's a hit job 20 years too late. Yeah, well, talk about the money. I've made absolutely nothing on this book. I wrote this book to get opportunities to speak because I feel like that's where I have the opportunity to help people. Not by them reading my book, but by them saying, hey, maybe this guy has something to offer to someone that might be feeling the way I used to feel. And that if I can help that person, that's my goal.
Yep. I get the same accusations, by the way. I'm only doing this for 47 years to make money or because I need to be famous. And I'm like, I would rather be doing anything but this, and I could make a lot more money than doing this.
Yes,
But this is
indeed.
my passion because I got recruited into the Moonies cult, and I became a right-wing fascist that was ready to kill on command and die on command and
Wow.
kill all the non-believers. And when I nearly died in a van crash and then, had the confrontation with my dad, who cried and said, how would you feel if it was your son who met a group of controversial people and dropped out of college and disappeared from your life? And I could see he genuinely was concerned about me. I said, I'd probably be doing what you're doing now, but you've been brainwashed by the communists. And he's
Oh
like,
my
well,
gosh.
just listen to them. These former Moonies, just listen to them. If you want to go back after a few days, I'll drive you there myself, but at least your mother and I will be able to sleep at night knowing we did the responsible thing. So for me, I wanted to prove I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed, that I knew what I was doing. But thankfully, when I learned about Chinese communist brainwashing and listened to the ex-members tell their horror stories, I found myself listening to them and then thinking, "Oh, I have much better stories than that of
Oh
abuse."
my gosh.
But it was like surfacing it in my head,
Hmm.
right? But at the point that I realized Moon was a liar, he couldn't have been the Messiah. He's not a man of God. He's not anyone. He's not the perfect parent, the true father of humankind. I just cried and I was like, how could I have believed this? Like, what happened to me? And it was like somebody opening up a shades in a dark room and the sun comes in. That's what it felt like to me. It was
Wow.
like, what happened to me? And then I
Wow.
just wanted to read and learn about psychology and understand persuasion and brainwashing and mind control. And people who had studied Chinese brainwashing, I sought them out and they're like, actually, we just studied it secondhand, but you've lived it and they did it to you and you did it to other people. So you should study psychology and explain it to us. So I was like, I like this idea. Instead of being a college dropout who's ashamed and embarrassed of being a Mooney, like learning psychology and teaching a Yale psychiatrist, I could do that.
Wow.
But little did I know I'd be doing it for my whole life because it's
Yeah,
turned
I'm
out to be,
fascinated by psychology.
yeah. I still love to learn. I'm still fascinated, and I love to talk to interesting people like yourself and share the journey. And as your father influenced so many people to do harm, to do, to think narrowly and to think, in a, superiority, get rid of all the others that aren't like us and we're the best. I think promoting people like yourself and your book and your experience is a healthy role model for the public.
Yeah, thank you.
And I want anyone who's listening to this, if you were born or raised in an authoritarian family or group, I say, if Kelvin can do it, you can do it too. Listen to this man and read his memoir and understand that you can do good and rewrite the self messages, the programming,
Yes, yes,
and
indeed.
love yourself and
Yes,
admire
you can
yourself.
choose to love yourself. Absolutely.
Yep.
It's not an easy choice when you've come from that kind of background, but if it's something you really want to do and you have the discipline to keep working at it, you can do it for
Yep.
sure.
So I want to share with you a healing strategy. I'm a mental health professional. I was taught this by Daniel Brown, a forensic psychologist who wrote a book on attachment repair. And so it's incredibly simple technique, but I would like to share it with you if I may and my listeners. Um, The idea is to go back to a traumatic moment in one's childhood. And then the therapist asks, I'd like you to imagine the ideal mother and the ideal father uniquely suited to your personality and what you would have wanted them to say or do.
Wow.
Instead, you know,
Wow.
pick a specific traumatic event, go back, imagine the ideal mother and the ideal father, and rewire that traumatic event to be a loving, nurturing. So I'm going to give you a quick example. In my training, Dan showed me a woman who had a nightmare apparently when she was 8 and screamed out in the middle of the night. And in reality, her parents told her to shut the F up or they'll come in and kick the SHIT out of her. So Dan said, I want you to imagine, you have this nightmare and the ideal mother and ideal father. So this woman is like, oh, they'd immediately come in and turn on the lamp, and my mother would hug me and say, oh, honey, it was just a nightmare. Daddy and I are here for you. And she would rock me back and forth. My dad would sit at the base of the bed and tap my leg. I'm here for you too, honey. And then my father would go to the kitchen and warm some milk and bring back some chocolate chip cookies while my mom would sing me a lullaby. And she did this beautiful healing scene for herself. And the goal is to make that the default memory. She still remembers what actually happened, but now she has a new default memory of this loving, nurturing, safety, healing experience. And by doing this technique over and over and over again, you create healthy mother and healthy father in your head.
I can totally imagine that.
Yeah, and you can literally remake, because we know we have neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. We can rewire our neurons the way we want, with an internal locus of control based on our healthy, authentic self. And it really works.
Interesting.
Yeah. And of course, it's great if you have a therapist who's trained in this protocol. But honestly, I've been telling people just what I shared with you. And they're like, that's great. I'm going to do it. And they report really incredible results. But you got to know what you got to know in order to understand, the simplicity of it. But deep down inside, people know what they want. They want love. They want security. They want safety. They want self-esteem. They want to know that they're loved and special, that they're good, that they're smart, that they're capable.
Yes, indeed.
And pass it on, right? And that's why I'm saying this on the podcast and wanting to share it with people. You don't need to be walking around with these chains of trauma from one's childhood. One can really climb out of that.
Yes, indeed. Another healing experience that I've had is with this charity that I founded 15 years ago, the Divine Child Foundation. So when I first started going over to Georgia and working with these orphans, these kids were not in a good situation at all. They had been put in this institution, and it was basically a ragtag bunch of kids aged 5 through 16. And I kind of had this vision of going in there, and the kids will all be happy to see me, and I'm going to help them and help their life be a little bit better. And, but when you first went in there, the kids were like scowling at you. They were angry, they were depressed. And, my first immediate reaction was like, oh, rejection, they won't even look at me. But then, I was just like, wait, this is not about me. This is about them. And so I just made it a goal right there to try to break through to each one of these kids and to let them know that there was at least one person on the planet that loved them, regardless of who they were or where they came from. And I just started that by trying to make eye contact with them and smiling and just looking at them and smiling and being really gentle and calm and friendly. And one by one, those barriers all came down. But at the same time, as I was giving that love out, it was like I was also giving it to myself. And so it really was a gradual increased healing process for me, just doing that and recognizing and knowing it wasn't about me and having the capability that I never had before to overcome that and say, I'm going to love you no matter what. And it was extremely powerful.
Yeah. And I'm an adoptive parent myself. My wife and I adopted a 22-month-old from what is now Russia, but was Crimea at the time. And, they had plastic potties in a row, no diapers because they had no money. The kids were all hungry. And, your heart goes out to it and you want to adopt more than one. But, we were older parents, I was 50 and it was like, let's do one. And we had hired a Russian pediatrician to review the medical records. And she's like, don't adopt this child. He's got fetal alcohol issues and all these really severe problems. And my wife and I had already, bonded with him. And we're like, we're gonna go for it.
Wow.
And it's being a parent is a profound responsibility, but it's also one of the things that has helped me to grow as a human being and appreciate humanity and appreciate, and you get to relive your childhood. You do get to do. My father was a workaholic, so I saw him on Sundays and I would say goodnight to him at night. During my early years, I'd see him on Sunday, but I got to spend a lot of time with my kid and, hold his hand, take him to the aquarium, to go on these, all these journeys and meet people and first time experiences. It's just so precious.
I loved it.
Yeah,
they're grown now. But coaching them and just playing with them. And I mean, before I became a parent, I could not get down on the floor and play with another child because I was so self-conscious that I didn't know how to interact with other children. I wouldn't do it. But when I had my own children, I don't know, it was like, it just came natural and I didn't feel that way anymore. And then all of a sudden I was able to then interact with other children that weren't not mine because I just felt like I knew how to do it and how to make them feel comfortable and at ease. And I love it.
Yeah, it's marvelous. I have to confess, we got a lot of coaching. Like, Steve, get down on the floor and be eye level with your, 25-inch tall little munchkin, or lift him up so you have that eye contact, etc. I mean, and he had eating disorders. He had a million disorders. And it's like, your job is to put the food in front, not to force him to eat. You can eat in front of him and make it into a game and, play airplane and all that kind of stuff. But we needed a lot of help, but we were fortunate in getting that help and advice.
That's good, yeah. My daughters were 3 months old when we adopted them, so.
That's
and they, they had some issues too, but it was,
But it's the earlier, the better in terms of attachment protocols. So it's really, really great. So I take it your foundation continues to this day?
Yes, I just got back from Georgia a little over a week ago.
So tell our listeners more about it. Maybe we can get some donors to help you in your...
Well, it's called the Divine Child Foundation. And so We started with just working with one orphanage. Went over there with my wife in 2007 after we had gotten everything set up and legal status and a board of directors. And so we went over there in January of 2007 and we said, we're just going to visit every orphanage that we can find in the country. So we spent 2 weeks driving all over the country, visiting every orphanage we could find. And we said, we're just going to choose the one that we feel like is the best fit for us. And we did that. It was a unanimous decision between me and my wife and our driver and our translator.
Okay.
And so we just started working with that orphanage. It was about 45 kids, and it was in an old abandoned schoolhouse, had 98 windows, and maybe 3 of them were left intact.
Oh, boy.
All the rest were broken. There was no heating system. There was no running water, no flush toilets. The electrical system was terrible. The roof leaked. We completely rebuilt the entire orphanage and replaced all the windows and doors and repaired the roof, put in a heating system, put in running water, flush toilets, and did, administered to those kids for several years and saw them come into a family under the guidance of a fantastic director. And then the Georgian government decided that they wanted to deinstitutionalize their children. So instead of having kids in these really big orphanages, they worked with the USAID, and they would purchase large residential homes in outlying villages, and then USAID would remodel them into children's homes that would have no more than 10 children per home, and they would set them up in like a family type structure. And they asked the Divine Child Foundation to run 2 of these homes, and we agreed. And then about a year later, they said that another organization like us was going bankrupt and wanted us to take on those 2 homes. So we agreed. And then a few years after that, they came to us and said, we want to start deinstitutionalizing severely disabled children. And my first reaction to that was, no, I do not want to do that. I had a phobia about, severely disabled children, like, people with cerebral palsy or, severe spinal birth defects where they couldn't walk or they were basically just, no bone structure below the waist, things like that. But my director was like, I can do this. And I, for about a year, we were back and forth. And I'm like, no, we can't do this. She's like, yes, we can do this. So finally we agreed. And so that house opened up about 4 years ago. And I was there the day they brought the children in. And I was scared. And I still had that phobia. And, none of the kids could walk. The most they could do for their self-mobility was basically to move themselves around on their elbows. And a lot of them, couldn't communicate. They couldn't talk. And I just kind of stood back and watched as they were brought into the house and put into their separate rooms. And then one child was in the playroom, and I just decided to go in there. And I got down on the floor with her and started playing with her with a little ball. And that phobia just evaporated. And now it's one of my favorite houses to visit when I'm in Georgia. So we take care of those kids in those houses. But we also have a lot of graduates. We've been doing this for 15 years now, and a lot of these kids have reached the age of 18, which in Georgia, they have to leave the orphanage system. And they have no place to go. So, we've made it our mission to take care of them and get them on their feet and get them training or education or housing. So half of our work is with our graduates and half of our work is with the kids that are still in the system. And then about 3 years ago, the Swiss government offered us a grant to open a counseling center for at-risk youth, like teenagers that were heading toward the criminal justice system, to take these kids away from the jail and instead get them psychological counseling and vocational training and hopefully redirect them into making better life choices.
Mm-hmm.
So we opened that 3 years ago, and now we've just opened a second one in Western Georgia. It's called the Compass Center, but it does that kind of training. Most of the kids are brought to us by the Georgian government, but some of the kids are brought to us by their parents when they see what's happening and they're afraid for,
Wow.
their children's future.
I'm so impressed by
So that's what we do.
What you've done. Wow. Good for you.
It's incredibly rewarding experience. I have a lot of friends in Georgia now, and I really like going over there and spending time with the kids and just getting to know them and to help them with what they need.
So tell me, what was the connection with Georgia in the first place? Because when I think about,
because that's where I adopted, we adopted our two daughters from, was from Georgia. And then
we went to Ukraine because we were older parents, and a lot of places we were told wanted.
We actually started in Ukraine.
Uh-huh.
And we were going to do a sibling group because we decided we wanted to have at least two children, but we didn't want to go through the adoption process more than once. So we wanted to adopt two at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
This was in 1995. And at that time, just as we were ready to finalize the adoption, Ukraine closed the country because of corruption issues. And they said they needed to rewrite their adoption laws to make sure there wasn't going to be corruption. And so our adoption agent we were working with had just started a brand new program in Georgia where you could get infants. And we were like, oh, yeah, because we were scared to death about attachment disorders. We've heard a lot of horror stories.
Right.
And so we jumped at the chance. And there's a lot in my book about that. It was a nightmare experience, but we got lucky. That actually worked out. But then, 16, 17 years ago, a friend of mine gave me an article about orphans in Georgia, and it just brought everything back. And then at the dinner table that night, I was just like, hey, we should figure out a way to help these kids, to give back for the gifts that we've received. And that's how the idea of the foundation started.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Kelvin, I want to direct you to my website, to a blog with Joyce Pavo, Pavao, who is one of the world authorities on adoption. And before we adopted Matthew, I did a training with her, and she herself was an adoptee, and she's been championing a shift from parent-centered adoptions to child-centered adoptions, and challenging, wanting to have open records so the adoptees could find their birth parents more easily.
Yeah, I have found both of my daughter's birth parents. I've befriended them, and then eventually have taken my daughters over there and introduced them to their birth families. Very powerful experience.
Absolutely. And in our case, Matthew's parents are in Russian war territory at the moment. And but we were also advised it's on his timetable, not ours, for encouraging, connections. But I was told by Joyce, get as much information as you can about the family, how to contact them, and siblings and other things like that. I agree with her. I knew these families and befriended them and visited them every time I was in Georgia for years before I told them about my daughters. Because, when I asked both of these families if they had given birth to these kids, they said no. Interesting.
Yeah. They denied that these children ever existed. Of course, that changed pretty dramatically when their children were standing in front of me, and I said, does this such and such date ring a bell to you? So, yeah, it was very dramatic, for sure.
Yeah, there's so many wonderful children needing a home and needing care. And there's so many politicized, things around, having children, etc. But it's like there's so many great kids, and if you want to be a parent, there's a child that you could love and will love you back. And it's such a win-win.
Yeah, definitely the greatest gifts I've ever received.
Yeah, but you want to do it with your eyes open too, because it's a lot of work.
Indeed.
And a lot of expense. So circling back, we have just a few more minutes as we wrap up. Any other last thoughts or messages you'd like to share with the public about all the stuff
I guess
that's
the
happening?
other aspect of my healing really was reading. I did a lot of reading about the nature of thoughts and, things like, authors such as Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie. I love a book written about Buddhist psychology by Jack Kornfield called The Wise Heart. Those kind of things, when I read them, it just like resonated with me. Every time I read just even a paragraph, I just automatically felt better, no matter what was going on in my life. So reading about that kind of stuff, the true nature of our thoughts and the fact that we have a choice, that made a big difference in my life as well.
Yep. Great. So continued success with your foundation. Do you think about doing any more writing since there's such a resurgence of anti-Semitic violence, horror stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm considering retiring, in the next couple of years, and that could be a project for sure. I've had people suggest it to me.
Yep. Well, it's a journey, but again, you're a role model of a healthy, ending story to a terrible beginning story. Not that you're anywhere close to ending, but you know what I mean, that you you pulled yourself out of that and renounced it and, redefined yourself, and you're found self-love and self-acceptance and had a very rewarding life, it sounds like to me.
Yes,
so
indeed.
Congratulations, Kelvin Pierce. Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Pleasure meeting you, Stephen.
Great. Pleasure is mine. Steve Hassan here. It's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind, only you should control it.